Hello, hello, I'm Tracy Pierce. Thanks for joining me for these free mini animal communication sessions. We're right at the top of the hour, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Got at least one person joining us, I'm hoping. So today we're talking to my doggy friend, Sophie. Pull her picture up here on the screen for you. So this is Sophie, and Sophie's actually has played a very important role in my learning of animal communication. Sophie previously belonged to a friend of mine who was an animal communication practice partner. And she and I did hours and hours and hours. I think we figured it was somewhere between 200 and 300 hours worth of practice together, just practicing animal communication. And Sophie at the time lived with my friend Nina, and Sophie was one of the first dogs that we talked to, and so she always has a very special place in my heart. And I'm hoping that Sophie's previous owner will jump on here, and if she has any questions, can type them in. So if you're joining us live, there is a chat box. If there are any questions that you have for Sophie today, like on the bottom bar of Zoom, there should be a little icon that says chat that you can click on. And if you have questions, you can just type them in there. So let me turn this fan off here. The little heater is a little chilly here where I am today. And I'm gonna go ahead and start just getting quiet and tuning into Sophie and see what she would like to share with us today. So immediately what I feel is Sophie's softness. She has a very soft way of interacting with people and other animals. She's even showing like how soft her fur is. She's just got this really soft, like her fur feels so soft and beautiful. She shows how that same energy that's so soft in her fur is really around her whole body. Yeah, and she's saying she's really had a change in how she feels about some things regarding her living situation, particularly. So if you can see in the picture, you know, Sophie's actually sitting on somebody's lap, and that person has since passed away. And Sophie, her job was very much, she's showing, was very much taking care of, helping take care of this woman, this elderly woman. And she's showing me how some of the previous times we talked to Sophie, you know, about what she wanted to do, you know, like she knew that this woman was towards the end of her life, and we had done some sessions. And she had thought, Sophie had thought that she wanted to start working with kids after that. She had one boy in particular that she really wanted to work with. And it just wasn't logistically possible. And so she's showing, Sophie is now living with another elderly couple. She says, there's something that's really softened my energy, and I've started to understand that working with older people is really more what I'm energetically set up to do. Yeah, she's showing me working with kids, it's a little bit more, like her energy gets a little more up and down, up and down. You know, kids can be wild and run around, and she's seeing like, oh, I have to watch and, you know, not get tripped over and things like this. Whereas she's showing like with the elderly people, there's kind of this energetic spreading that she does. I feel very grounded with the elderly people, she says. I don't have to run around and chase them like I do with the little kids. Entertaining older people is very different from entertaining kids, she says. And I thought I was really up for that job of entertaining kids, but I'm really glad. She's saying she's really glad that Nina was tuned in enough to know that that maybe wasn't the right thing for Sophie. And she feels like Nina really was able to find her the best new place. Thank you, Sophie. I'm sure Nina will be happy to hear that. I think Nina already knows that, Sophie says. Okay, I bet she does. So Sophie, how's life for you right now? We're kind of in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic, and I wonder if things seem different for you there, or if you notice anything or anything else you want to share with our viewers about what's happening. She's showing me that life isn't too terribly different for her right now. She says the TV's on a little bit more than it used to be. She says she can sometimes feel the panic in her humans there, but not so much. She says life hasn't changed that much for me. The people where I live are a little bit more contained, and they weren't, they're older. They weren't so active about always going out and always doing things. Yeah, and she's like, the people I live with, they had plenty of, they had food stocked up. They had a couple, maybe a couple weeks, maybe a month worth of food. So it wasn't like there wasn't a big panic in her household. She said she noticed when she's outside and like doing walks when she comes to the other dogs that they seem a little bit more maybe rattled than she does. She says that she can tell when she's walking in the neighborhood, the other dogs seem a little bit more anxious, like she can see in their energy. She's showing me this like agitation, kind of moving fast kind of energy around the dogs. And she feels like other dogs maybe aren't so lucky as her, like they live with people who are a bit more anxious. And she says we animals are a lot like sponges, a lot like little babies are too. Like we can really take on energy from our owners. She says that's one thing that she's been watching in herself, is how she will move any energy that kind of gets stuck to her. She has a way that she kind of moves it through her energy and just kind of throwing it off. Like she's showing her body here, and it's almost like, so if this is her head, like throwing the energy off back through her tail. I've been trying to tell the other dogs when I see them about that, but I'm not sure they always hear me. Why do you think that is, Sophie, or do you have an idea? Well, they're so caught in it. They're so caught in that whirlwind of anxiety that sometimes they don't even hear what's really important. Okay. Sophie, do you have any advice for our viewers, maybe ones who have pets or ones who don't? Just what would you like to tell us about all of this? I'm curious as to your viewpoint, Sophie. What I feel are showing me is that we need to hold our energy in a bigger way. What she's showing me is sometimes when we get anxiety or maybe emotions that are a bit more on the panicked or negative kind of side of things, she's showing how like our energy gets smaller. We become smaller. and more compact. And what she's suggesting is, I feel this point in her heart, this little spot in her heart that she's kind of pointing to. It's like going to the very center of your heart and letting that radiate out from there. She says making your energy bigger can really help, and it helps regulate other people. What do you mean by that? Do you mean nervous system regulation? Yeah, she's showing me a picture of somebody I know who is a nervous system expert who works with people who have a lot of trauma and to learn how to regulate their nervous systems. What Sophie's showing us is that's one of the roles that pets can really play during this pandemic is we're trying to help our humans regulate their nervous systems. She says we normally do this, in everyday life. It's just become a little bit more difficult and more intense and more important for us to do it during, this more panicked pandemic time. And she feels like some of the pets are getting a bit overwhelmed. But yeah, she wants us all to be aware of, she's showing it's almost like a human inside, let's call it a beach ball, a sphere inside. And she's showing how we're more than just our physical bodies. Our energy comes out outside our physical bodies a bit. And, some people can feel that they're more sensitive, but it's her kind of plea or her asking for humans to be more aware of what's happening in that energetic layer around them. And sometimes she says it does stem from inside the physical body. Like if you feel anxiety, like she's showing this kind of twisting in my own heart. And she says, yeah, when it's all twisted up and small, like our energy just condenses down. But if you can let yourself, like, even though it hurts or, there might be pain or feelings that are uncomfortable that come up, she's saying if you don't crunch in your energy, allowing it to be a little bit bigger allows more space for those kind of icky or the emotions that maybe don't feel so good to allow them to kind of process out. Because when we contract, it's almost like we're holding it in rather than letting it go. Thank you, Sophie. Peek. The chat, okay. Sophie, is there anything else you would like to share with us today? It's totally up to you, lady. She's like, oh, what do you want to know about? I just want to know how you're feeling or any other messages you might have for our listeners, our viewers. She says, you guys could all learn a lot from old people. What do you mean by that, Sophie? She's showing how, there's a real difference between like teenagers who are always running around and zoom, 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 like just lots of physical energy. And, when we get older, we just don't always move quite as fast, is what she's saying. And she's really encouraging those of us who are still younger to move even as slowly as somebody who's twice your age, she says, to really look to the older generation and how quickly they are moving. And it might be a good example for those of us who may be having a hard time or getting a little cabin fevery. But there is something, she's saying, I'm not saying don't go for a walk or don't do exercise, like that's all very important, but that overall, kind of as a society, we're very unused to sitting still or being still or holding any kind of, again, stillness. We're connected to the TV, so there's a little bit of this blah, blah, blah that's going on over here. And then, we've got our computer on, and so there's this other stuff going on here. And she just shows this chaotic energy all happening. And she's like, what would it be like if you only had one thing on, like maybe you were only looking at your phone instead of looking at your phone and watching TV and maybe looking at something on your computer, there's a way of really slowing down and bringing things into a bit more stillness that can allow us to know ourselves a bit better. Yeah, she's showing there, it's going to be interesting seeing the end of this pandemic, because it's going to be an opportunity for a lot of people to go more deeply into the stillness, and that stillness can really transform things. Whereas there's going to be another sector of the population that is just kind of like hanging around and trying to distract themselves. And she's like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that necessarily. It's just people think about life in different ways. And she's really hoping that the people who can go into the stillness can come out with, feels like some kind of a transformation, like a further step down, perhaps a spiritual path or whatever kind of journey you might be on in this life. Thank you, Sophie. And Sophie's saying, okay, I think that's all I have to share for today. She is telling me I can come back to her anytime and we can talk with her some more. Yes, Sophie, I always love talking with you. Thank you so much for connecting with us today. Stop sharing this screen with you. All right, so thank you so much for joining me here today. And Sophie thanks you for listening to her words of wisdom. And I'm going to keep doing these sessions, these little mini sessions for the foreseeable future. So feel free to shoot me a message if you're interested to have a little session with, your pets or an animal friend who's been hanging around and feels like maybe wants to give you some messages. So just, send me a message if you're interested. And until next time, take care and be well.